In 1790, the United States learned a painful lesson on the frontier. An American army marched into the Ohio wilderness and was ambushed. It was called Clair Defeat. The loss shocked the young nation, but instead of slowing down, the government chose to push harder. 1 year later, the United States sent a larger army deeper into native territory. This time, it would end far worse. What happened in November 1791 remains the worst defeat ever suffered by the U.S. Army. Worse than Little Bighorn. Worse than any single day of fighting against native forces in American history. This is the story of St. Clair's defeat, a disaster born from overconfidence, poor leadership, and a refusal to learn from failure. After Clair's defeat, native resistance in the Northwest Territory only grew stronger. Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, and other tribes formed a powerful confederation. Settler attacks increased. Frontier cabins burned. American authority west of the Ohio River was slipping away. President Washington faced a dilemma. Backing down would signal weakness. Pressing forward meant risking another defeat. Congress chose force. A new army would be raised. Bigger, better equipped, and led by a man they believed could finish the job. That man was Arthur St. Clair. Arthur St. Clair was not an inexperienced soldier. He had fought in the American Revolution. He had endured harsh campaigns and long marches. But by 1791, St. Clair was 60 years old. He suffered from chronic illness, including gout so severe he could barely walk. Despite this, he was placed in command. His army looked impressive on paper, around 2,000 men. But the reality was far different. Most of his troops were raw recruits. Many had been enlisted only weeks earlier. Discipline was poor. Training was rushed. Supplies were late. Food spoiled. Weapons were in short supply. St. Clair knew these problems existed, but pressure from Washington and Congress was immense. So in the fall of 1791, the army marched anyway. The march north was slow and miserable. Rain turned roads into mud. Cold set in early. Men fell ill. Desertion became common. Entire units melted away at night. Supply wagons lagged behind. Rations were cut. Morale collapsed. St. Clair pushed forward regardless. He believed speed would compensate for weakness, that reaching native strongholds quickly would prevent another ambush. But native leaders were watching every move. They tracked the army from the forests. They counted its numbers. They saw its exhaustion. And they waited. By early November, the army reached a clearing near the headwaters of the Wabash River, in present-day Ohio. St. Clair ordered the men to camp. No trenches were dug. No defensive earthworks were built. Pickets were thin and poorly placed. The army camped in a loose formation, surrounded by dense forest. It was a perfect target. Native leaders finalized their plan. Little Turtle, Blue Jacket, veteran warriors hardened by years of frontier fighting. They chose dawn. Just before sunrise, the forest exploded. Gunfire erupted from every direction. American sentries were overwhelmed instantly. Soldiers ran from their tents half-dressed. Officers struggled to form lines. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. Native warriors fired, moved, and disappeared into the trees. They struck from the flanks. Then the rear. American formations collapsed within minutes. Artillery crews were slaughtered at their guns. Militia units broke and fled. Regulars tried to hold and were cut down. St. Clair attempted to rally his men, but command had disintegrated. This was not a battle. It was a massacre. For 3 hours, the fighting raged. Each American counterattack was met with concentrated fire. Each attempt to regroup was shattered. Wounded men lay screaming between the lines. Officers were targeted deliberately. By mid-morning, the outcome was clear. The army was finished. St. Clair ordered a retreat. What followed was panic. Men ran blindly through the woods. Native warriors pursued, cutting down stragglers for miles. Of the roughly 2,000 Americans who entered the fight, more than half were killed or wounded. No other U.S. Army defeat comes close. More than 600 American soldiers were killed. Another 300 wounded. Women and children traveling with the Army were slaughtered. Entire units ceased to exist. By comparison, at Little Bighorn, U.S. losses totaled just over 200. St. Clair's defeat remains the deadliest single defeat in U.S. Army history. Native losses were minimal. The Confederation had proven itself not only brave, but strategically superior. When news reached the East Coast, disbelief followed. Washington was stunned. Congress demanded answers. An investigation was launched, the first congressional inquiry into executive military failure. St. Clair was blamed, then partially absolved, then quietly sidelined. But the deeper truth could not be ignored. The United States had no real army. St. Clair's defeat forced reform. The militia system was no longer enough. Training standards rose. Discipline hardened. A new force was created, the Legion of the United States. Under a new commander, Anthony Wayne, the Army would return, this time prepared. 3 years later, Native resistance would be broken at Fallen Timbers. But that victory was built on the lessons learned here. In blood, St. Clair's defeat is rarely remembered. It sits between the Revolution and the War of 1812, between victory and confidence. But without it, the modern U.S. Army would not exist. This was the moment America learned that independence did not guarantee survival. Only preparation did.